Hi, Mikayla.
Hi, Matt.
What if I were to describe to you a wave of violent, land stealing immigrants who consume everything in their path? What time period would you think that is?
I would just say all of America.
That's correct. In this story, those immigrants are Americans in the Oregon Territory, which will soon become Washington State in 1859.
We're going to the origins.
The origin story.
That's the title of this episode.
The original border crisis. Welcome to What the Washington, a historical, social, and political tour of the weirdest state in the nation. I'm Matt.
I'm Mikayla. I wasn't expecting you to do that. I forgot.
I took the initiative.
Yeah.
This episode series is all about taking the initiative.
Oh, is that what kicking people out of their territories is?
It's called taking initiative.
Yeah. Well, how did you describe this first line again?
The violent wave of immigrants consuming everything in their path.
Oh, okay.
I had been listening to some recent border discourse in American politics and was very disturbed about the rhetoric about immigrants, and I was like, hey, that's this country, because our history was of immigrants pouring across border after border, breaking every law and treaty and scooping up land and forcing the people who actually live there off of it, which seems to be what people are projecting onto our immigrant communities coming from both Latin America and from Africa and Asia. So I was a little bit disturbed by that, so I wanted to take my opportunity to correct the record, because if you look at our state's history, it's filled with people doing worse than what anybody from South or Central America is doing at the south of the border.
Mm-hmm.
This story is the OG border crisis. It's going to be 2 episodes back to back.
The Canadian border crisis.
The Canadian border crisis. Yeah, except
the real border crisis.
The real border crisis, the one that we're not talking about. It's going to include indigenous peoples. It's going to talk about Greeks. It's going to talk about Russians. It's going to talk about Spanish people, British people, Americans. It's going to have a couple Confederates or future Confederates in it.
Mm-hmm. Fun.
And it's going to have, at first I wrote a mischievous pig. Now I am changing that. I'm copy editing in real time. A sad story for a pig that did not deserve what it got.
I don't think it's mischievous. I think I don't know that that's a good. We shouldn't
malign the pig.
Yeah, I don't think the pig did anything wrong.
The pig just was digging through a guy's garden.
In fact, the guy who killed the pig probably did the worst.
He set it all up. But this story is about invisible lines, basically. Lines that aren't real, that we make up, both as communities, but then also as countries. And it starts all the way back to a fiction about a pathway called the Northwest Passage. Have you ever heard of the Northwest Passage, Mikayla?
I know kind of about the Northwest Passage. Maybe is that the Alaska Canadian thing?
Yeah, it's kind of weird. It comes from old maps that were basically wrong, that detailed a path between basically the Arctic Greenland Circle to like Asia, just like over the water through the Arctic.
Oh, I was going to say through...
What is the Arctic Circle? Everyone was looking for it. It was kind of the hot topic of the 15th and 16th century. Even Columbus was like, I'm hoping to get there. does not, as obviously. um, Everyone's looking for it. The Brits, the Spanish, the French. If you find it, you have an easy route. The Philippines.
Oh, Asia.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And for them, it's the East Indies. Turns out it exists now.
I was going to say, don't people actually do it?
Yeah, because of climate change.
Yeah.
There's no ice there.
Well, didn't they also break through the ice?
They used to, but it was too thick even in the... Up until metallurgy, they couldn't get through the ice.
Well, that's what I meant, like, with iron. Isn't Victor Frankenstein doing the Northwest Passage?
Yeah, and he gets caught in the ice.
Yeah. Well, that's what I mean. Like, they got caught in the ice, but, like, they would still attempt to...
Yeah.
That's about as far as I got in that book.
Oh, boy.
No, I got a little bit farther, but this is an aside. But it was like, I don't understand why we're following this dude while he's at the Arctic Circle, but I'm assuming that the monster finds him. I think I got to that point, and then I stopped.
The Modern Prometheus. That's, I think, the name of the alternative title.
Mm-hmm.
It's the Modern Prometheus or something like that. Good book. I liked it in high school. So in 1494, we're going all the way back, 1492, ocean blue. The Pope in 1494 divides the new colonized world into two parts. Spanish possessed to the west of a certain line. To the east, Portuguese possessed and occupied. That's basically how come Brazil exists.
Mm-hmm.
And then everything else is
all Latin and South America.
Yeah, it's Spanish speaking. He does that division, which allows the Spanish to sail from the Philippines to the Pacific coast, to Mexico and these different places that they already have kind of conquered. It's very interesting how far the Spanish trade networks really stretch. After the Pope decides the treaty, it's called the Treaty of Tordesillas, is decided and the ink is printed. They also don't account for the fact that the Brits and the French did not sign that treaty.
Mm-hmm.
And so same with the Dutch. So they're like, oh, we're just going to also get there too and put colonies all over this area as well.
Yeah, I will say that apart from some colonies in the Caribbean, the French weren't really a factor. Neither were the Dutch. I mean, post Louisiana Purchase.
Yeah, well, that's like the mid 1800s. The French were actually up there. They had most of Canada under their control.
Oh, that's true. They did have a lot of Canada.
And they also had a lot of colony little islands along the in the Atlantic Ocean and in the Pacific Ocean as well. But that's insane with the British. Of course, the British ran everything. The Dutch were the ones who did get the short end of the stick.
They all went to Africa, though.
They
so
really,
fine.
And so did Portugal. Portugal and the Dutch went to Africa and Indonesia. The Dutch went to Indonesia. And if you got into Indonesia really early, you made a lot of money, which the Dutch did. That's why we got Dutch Shell, the oil companies, literally from the export trade companies of the colonial era.
The Dutch went to Africa and just messed everything
They
up.
went wild. They had a great time. They were having a great time. So there's a Greek fellow, a Greek explorer named Juan de Fuca.
Of the De Fuca Passage.
His real name is Ioannis de Phocos. Because he's Greek. And he was commissioned by the Spanish Navy at one point to sail out from the Philippines to the west coast of the United States, basically.
It's how you think, like, we have all the Spanish language things like Anacortes, and then you find out it's just named after some girl named Anna Curtis. Yeah, not even Cortez. Curtis.
Well, I will, because I know that you'll appreciate this. I will fill you in some names that are familiar to you because you're from here. And we'll enjoy the fact that we know these names. Fildago
Bay.
Fildago is the first mate of the expedition under De Eliza, which Eliza Island off the coast of Bellingham is named after.
He's also one letter away from being named after a really good horse movie.
Okay.
What?
I don't even know what movie.
Hildago.
Eliza?
No, Phildago.
Phildago, yeah.
Hildago.
Yeah. Yes. I didn't even think about it. And then there were a couple of Spanish expeditions, but the big one, the main one, was the first one in 1592 under Juan de Fuca, which he doesn't name the Strait of Juan de Fuca. He doesn't name it after himself. He names it originally the Strait of Ananian, which is the name of the fictional strait to the Northwest Passage.
Wait, who created the idea of the Northwest Passage? Like,
It was a map, like old maps.
Is it well known that it's fake at this point?
No, it's not.
So he just actually thought this is what that was.
Pure vibes. Okay. Everyone's doing it. Everyone's saying this is definitely the way we go from America to Asia. Mm-hmm. Not really understanding that there was really nothing else there. He actually stops right at the pillars. So there are pillars called the De Fuca pillars because they're right where he like listed them and put the coordinates for them. So he clearly had gone here or been here, but might have not like had a good mapping of everything. Because when he came back, he was like, here's the map. And everyone's like, I guess we're going to follow this map from now on. It's very interesting. Like, there's a bunch of stuff named after him. You know, the British captain who named it after him, his name is, or you know who the captain who named the strait after him?
No.
He's British. His name was Charles Barkley.
Oh, interesting.
He's
the one and only.
The one and only.
Diet
the
Coke
goat.
Addict.
We love Charles. Well, the first Europeans besides the Spanish...
Wait, hold on. Is that related to Barkley Village?
I doubt that, but it could be. There's going to be a lot of that in this, because there are a lot of people...
Do you think it's possible they just were like, oh yeah, that's a cool dude, and named it after him way?
Possibly. So, you know, I said 1592, right? Like, that's the first Europeans exploring. Mm-hmm. When we think of the Pacific Northwest, sometimes people include Canada, like or for them, Western Canada. And then we also sometimes include Southern Alaska. Alaska was colonized by Russians. Mm-hmm. They organized, I put in quotation marks because there was no one there. They barely sent anybody there. Besides ethnic Siberians who could live in a harsh climate like this. And they settled it under, I want to say this name is Vitus Bering, like Vitus, Vitus. Mm-hmm. But I know he's Danish, so I want to say it's actually Vitus.
With a W sound?
Yeah, with the W sound. Vitus Bering, but that's who this Bering Strait's named after. After this Danish-Russian explorer, or this Danish explorer commissioned by the Russian government to explore the area.
Did he find gold?
No, but he found a thing that was very important to the Russian state, which was endless fur.
Oh, yeah.
Alaska
fur trading
was a gold mine for fur trading, and that's also why they sent so many ethnic Siberians there, because they're great at this. Go send them to deal with it. And then they had them also marry in with the native populations in Alaska. So there are people who are ethnically both ethnic Siberian and also ethnic indigenous First Nations in Alaska. It's a very interesting, they called it Russian Creole, which...
I don't think so.
Perhaps one of the most cursed things I've ever heard.
Isn't the Creole bit sort of like the French influence?
No. In the term, the term Creole is like like a colonial term. So it's like anyone who is like of a native indigenous group and another group, they will call Creole. So like in this case, they call it Russian Creole because these are indigenous people who were married to settler colonists, and they're the descendants of those people.
What do we call Louisiana? Do we call it French Creole?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. The furs and timbers from Alaska are extracted and sent to Novo Archangelis, which is Archangel in Russian. And that's now Sitka. I don't know if you know where that is. I think you've been there.
Been there.
Yeah. Sitka used to be a Russian city or small town.
Also the name of one of the brothers in Brother Bear.
Yes, it is. The Russian influence actually stretches down to California.
Interesting.
They set up a fort called Fort Ross, or it was called Fort Ross as an Anglicization, but it's actually Fort Russe. And they had Swedish, Finnish, and indigenous people live there. And it's in Sonoma Valley. Or in North Sonoma Valley, and they built.
So they do the wineries.
The Spanish built, basically Sonoma as a city or a town
With all the wineries
to counter the Russians being right next door and to like pin them there.
Interesting.
And the reason why the Russians came all the way down to basically the central Northern California, more like Northern California, is that they couldn't land in Oregon and Washington. They tried to actually get into the Columbia River and into several of the Washington rivers, and they crashed their boats every single time. They lost like so many boats. They lost like 7 boats trying to get men into Oregon in Washington. But the navigation of the Columbia River and the navigation of the rivers in the Sound were so difficult that they just gave up. They just quit.
Did you ever have, or did you have Russian people in your high school?
I had one.
Yeah, we had one family that was like very ethnically Russian. Like I think maybe first generation kids.
The kid that was my age, his father came here after the collapse of the Soviet Union. So it wasn't like they had been here for a long time or anything. But yeah, so it's just a little interesting fact that Russians were here in Western Washington, or Western the United States, up until 1812. The colony lasted until 1812. So it wasn't like there was this like, they were there. There were people here. Then the Spanish send an expedition, a secret expedition. It is a secret. No one knows why they're going, but they're going to what they will call Nueva Galicia, which is a province in Spain. Because, Spain is called, or Mexico is called New Spain, and then there's different territories around. And so they leave, Juan Jose Perez Hernandez leaves from Western Mexico. They build an entire new dock in Jalisco just to be able to build ships to send them to Washington and Canada. And they go off, they get into a storm, get a little bit hurt. The ships get wrecked a little bit. They need repairs. So they go to San Diego. We love San Diego. Always been a Navy town. And
where's their launch point? Like where is it on the Baja California?
It's
or is
south of it.
Okay.
They're going from like central Mexico, essentially like they're in like, like there's Baja right there. They're like right on, if this is the finger, they're like halfway between the finger and the coast, and then they go like this and go up.
Okay.
And then they go to San Diego, they get their orders, and their order is, because Spain has spies everywhere, their orders is to intercept a bit, basically, and claim the entire western coast of the now United States for Spain, by getting off the boat and claiming it for Spain.
Mm-hmm.
Like, even though it's like that doesn't really mean anything really to anyone, because you don't really have a way to report that except if you leave like a fort there, and no one's doing that right at this point. And he gets the secret orders. They leave San Diego. They get the secret orders. They actually have to read the secret orders after they leave to make sure that no one knows what the orders are. No spies can get it back to us somewhere else. Which is, I think, it's kind of cool that navies have figured out, like, we can't let other navies know, so we're just gonna make you read your orders like a week after you go out to sea.
Until someone smuggles in a wetsuit and a GPS tracker and
they get
a
that
respirator.
Scuba suit. Yeah. Damn, where'd this come from? They get air bladders. That's when they're really cooked. So yeah, his mission was to chronicle everything, fall 60 degrees north, locate and search and catalog every usable harbor in sight for possible colonization, and then he would formally essentially claim all of that for Spain once he finds the right spot to stop. They get out of the boat to check for fresh water, and then get swarmed by indigenous tribesmen, probably Haida from Vancouver Island, or Nootka tribesmen, but they freak out, and basically after trading some silver spoons with them for some fresh water, they just leave. They say, yeah, we claimed it. We did it. Mm-hmm. Good job, everybody. They name things as they go up. They name the Olympic Mountains, or the Mountain Olympus, the Cerro Nevada de Santa Rosalia. So that's what the Spanish name for Mount Olympus in the Olympic Peninsula is.
They named it Sierra Nevada.
Yeah, well, that's the name. It's a high mountain. That's the
but the years are so.
Yeah, well, when did like if you go to Mexico, it's like the Sierra Octanals or Octernals or something like that.
Is it the Sierra Nevadas? Is a range? It's not a single.
Yeah, it's the whole range.
Okay.
Yeah.
For some reason I was thinking like there was a single mountain named Sierra Nevada, but right. I think I'm thinking of Shasta.
Right. Mm. The silver spoons actually come back in modern anthropology to be like who got there first, and eventually like the Spanish go, we gave these tribesmen silver spoons. If you find these particular silver spoons, we could prove that we were here, which is a very hard thing to prove.
Where is this that they landed?
They don't land. Actually, they never get off their boat. They're off of basically the coast of Vancouver.
Okay.
Vancouver, Canada, not Vancouver, Washington. Yeah. For our listeners,
Vancouver, Washington doesn't have a coast, so
no, it's on the shoreline.
It's on the river Columbia, bank. Yeah, but it's not the coast.
It's a pretty wide river. Bank. You're right. It's a bank.
Yes.
That's geography. So all of this is in 1774. A little country called the United States wins its revolution in 1783.
I've never heard of it.
Never heard of it. Fake country, not real. So it's all happening concurrently. Mm-hmm. Think muskets and like give me liberty, give me death is happening on one side of the continent. Mm-hmm. On the other side of the continent, the Spanish and the Russians and the Brits are carving up this imaginary map that they don't have any really good markers on. In 1783, the United States gets recognized by Great Britain in the Treaty of Paris, which allows the United States to formally allow ships to go out of harbor without worrying about British man-of-wars just blowing up everything. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of an important thing for naval exploration if you want to get boats out of the harbor. And about 6 years later, in 1789, the Nootka crisis happens when the Spanish order one of their explorers, or some of their explorers, not just one, but some of them from New Spain, to go back up to this area, as they call it, New Galicia, and reinforce it and force the British off of Nootka lands that they're trading with. Because they're, they set up these little trading posts all over the place. There's just little networks of like 4 or 5 guys all over, all of them. So the British, the French, not in this area, but the French are over on the other side. The Russians and the Spanish all are putting these little 5-man operations around, so you trade furs and all this stuff with the indigenous culture. They are fighting, the Europeans are fighting between each other constantly to get this trade, and they're all fighting to get the tribal trade. These tribal nations are very powerful. They're very coordinated societies. The Spanish go full tilt. Like, they're just like, we're tired of these British people stealing the good trade. They're making all great trade deals and we can't do it. So we're just going to muscle them. We're going to force them to do this. And so they try to take the Nootka Sound from them and the tribe and then reinforce it. They think they have France's backing, but they don't. Mm-hmm. France has promised them that they'll send them soldiers and ships to fight the British because they had just finished the revolution, right? What year did something vital happen in
I was going
France?
to say, do you mean the American Revolution? Because the French Revolution is just about to pop off.
Right.
Yeah. That's why I was confused at your timeline at first. I was like, aren't they, like, currently busy?
They're literally weeks away from the French government collapsing.
Yeah.
And so the Spanish thought that they were going to get backed up by the French. The British have Dutch support.
Kill barricades! Do you hear the people sing? Sing the song of amen.
The poor Spanish. The Spanish are not poor, but the Spanish had the distinct misfortune of having the French as their allies in 1789.
Yeah, in this particular time when they start calling out those. Well, this is the first one, right? So it's not guillotine season yet.
Oh no, this is guillotine season.
Oh, this is
the first phase of before it goes to guillotine season. But there will be a guillotine in like 2 weeks.
Oh.
Because, like, there's the first phase of the revolution, then there's the second phase of the revolution, then there's the terror, and then there's... But yes, you're right. It's the first French Revolution is guillotines.
Okay.
Ahoy.
Yeah.
The king is about to lose his head.
Mm-hmm.
So the Spanish lose when they realize the French aren't coming to support, and they basically give in to British trade concessions, which the British's trade concessions is we get everything. North, south... We don't care. We get the whole thing. That comes back because the Spanish still technically have claims. And a certain country is going to come and, let's just say, fill some space left over by the Spanish. In 1787, Robert Gray, who is sailing the boat Lady Washington, which is a terrible boat name, and Columbia Rediviva, which is also a terrible...
Get some creativity.
But both of those boats are what we were going to name our states after. And we named it after, of course, Washington.
Yeah.
But we named both... We were going to name the state Columbia originally. I know. And that's why the river is named Columbia as well.
Trust me, I know what we were going to do.
We chose... So the boat was called the Delaware when we had just named the state the Delaware.
Well, it's like...
New Delaware.
One of the most frustrating pieces of lore about Washington State is that the fact that they didn't choose to name it Columbia because they thought it would be too confusing with the District of Columbia. And then it ended up being more confusing because we just call District of Columbia Washington.
Yeah.
Or DC.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know if it's just a Washington thing that everybody calls it DC and not
I think we have to.
Washington.
We would go crazy.
Right. I wonder, that's what I was saying. I wonder if that's a generational thing or a location thing. Because I used to live in California though. So is it like when I moved, I stopped hearing people refer to it as Washington and only refer to it as DC? Or is it as I get older?
No, I think you're right because I know my cousins still call it Washington.
Yeah.
They don't call it DC.
And I feel like, I mean, it's been a few years.
They're all in Philly, so they're nearby.
It's been a few years since I've been on the East Coast, but usually when you say, "Oh, I'm from Washington," they think you're talking about DC, which is
they still do.
Annoying.
They still do. Yeah. No, she's right. Mikayla, you're right. The worst two possible names.
That's why I have to say you're from Seattle.
It could have been Cascade. It could have been a whole set of names.
Tahoma.
Tahoma. It could have been named after the mountain. We could have had it. We could have had it all. Really, like I am one of those people who think that Washington as a state name is not a very good state.
No,
name.
It sucks.
And our state flag is bad too, but that's a whole nother episode. That might be extra content. That's bonus content that'll coming at you if you guys request it. But yeah, Robert Gray, who of Gray's Harbor fame. Mm-hmm. Trust me, this is going to get messy, so he's not a great guy.
Well, I think that's true of most things that we have named institutions after.
It's true. He goes from Boston. Robert Gray goes from Boston. You know, the war's over. And he wants to open up that fur trade that everybody wants to get a piece of. Mm-hmm. He goes from Boston all the way around the Horn, which is insane, of South America.
So he does that instead of going across the country?
Yeah. He sails across.
Why would he do that?
Because he wants the boat so he can go to the Philippines after it's over in China. This is the whole trip. People literally spent their whole lives. Like, some of these trips are like, they leave in 1780s, like they'll leave in 1787 and they'll get back at like 1801. Mm-hmm. It's just like, how do you make money that way? I don't even know how you make money. There's no telegram. There's nothing to know that the business is successful. How do you have money and stuff? Like, I just don't get it. But that's a whole different time period.
Is it not more efficient? I mean, I know it's not at this point, but to just send the supplies for a boat over there and then build the boat in the harbor?
At this point, not yet. If you were in Mexico, yes, it would be. But in the United States, the American continent was too big and too sparsely populated to get supplies from one side to the other on a reliable basis.
Yeah, you did have to cross 2 mountain ranges if you were going to do that. So
the Oregon Trail is a real thing for a reason. That game is hard for a reason.
Well, you'll end up like the Dahmer party.
Yeah, you could do that too. So he arrives.
The Donner Party.
Donner,
I was like, that doesn't sound right. I was like, well, how ironic that he has a name like that.
You just retconned.
No, it's just very similar.
He arrives in 1788 after getting there leaving in 1787. He and his crew, part of his crew and his one of his first mates.
It took him 20 years to get around.
No, 1787 to 1788.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So a single year.
Yeah, a year. A year to get around the Horn of South America. And he does a bunch of fur trading. He leaves part of his crew there to do more fur trading while he's gone, because he goes to China, does a bunch of trading there, and sails back to America from the Indian Ocean, which are far safer waters and more navigable and reliable trade routes. And he leaves his crew there until 1790. He comes back from Boston, sails back, gets there in 1792. And then he becomes the first non-indigenous person to cross the Waima River, which is now the Columbia River, then names the river after his boat. Robert Gray is known by his crew to have a short temper and is very violent. He, on 2 occasions, opens up his ship's cannons on indigenous traders who are not willing to buy or not willing to sell their furs for the price that he's selling or he's buying them for. Killing several of them, one time in Tillamook Bay and the other time in Gray's Harbor. So, the good old American business tactic of overwhelming your...
What river did Lewis and Clark go down?
They came down the Snake River and then the Columbia.
So they were on the Columbia. Just not the full Columbia? Is that why he gets recognition?
I think this is 1780... Or this is 1790. They are like 1800.
Oh, so this is
This is 10
Lewis
years
and Clark.
before they even get here.
Okay.
He also meets George Vancouver on his way out. George Vancouver, who is sailing to the famous Vancouver expedition. I don't know why that I lost it for a second.
His name. Yeah.
So Vancouver begins his expedition in 1794, but he arrives here, I believe, in 1791 or 2.
So what was his expedition?
His expedition was to basically make good with the locals because he knew that Spanish control was basically wrestled away.
So did he leave from Spain to get here in
Vancouver?
Yeah.
No, Vancouver left from Great Britain.
To get here.
And then
and then that took him 10 years?
He went Pacific.
He went the long way?
He went the long way. And then he went back that way, too.
Why did he do that?
Because the British already have fleets there.
So he just did a lot of pit stops?
Yes. He had a lot of supplies already there.
Oh, did he go north through the Arctic and then around?
No, he went from Hawaii, went to Hawaii. Because Hawaii was an independent kingdom at that point.
Yeah, but from Britain, you can't get straight to Hawaii. So did he go around the Cape of Africa, or did he...
Yeah.
He went around Africa?
Yeah, because that's a more stable trade route.
No Northwest Passage.
No. But they were hoping to send him to find something like that, and what he found was he found a lot of trade partners in the indigenous tribes there, and he made a lot of tribal relationships and set up a couple trades posts, and then went on his way to Hawaii, back to Hawaii, because he went up to Alaska and then went back. So some of his crew might have some names that you recognize, and I just wanted to run through them really quick. Third Lieutenant Joseph Baker.
That's my mom's... No, that's my grandma's maiden name.
After Discovery's third Lieutenant Joseph Baker, the first on the expedition to spot the mountain from the water.
That's why it's called Mount Baker?
Yeah. They're just naming them. It has name. These things. I have to keep always saying this. These places have names already.
Yeah, what's the indigenous one for Mount Baker that for some reason I can't remember? It's C-H. Colshan. Yeah. Not C-H-K-U. But
also, all of these people are making maps. I have to also say that. Robert Gray, once he arrives in Boston, sells his maps to American trappers or people who want to go west, which is crazy to think somebody in 1787 wants to go to the frontier of the West when, like, the West is still Kentucky at that point.
They're sick. Listen, these people are sickos.
They're real sickos. These are real sickos. This is real sicko hours right now. Vancouver's friend, Alan Fitzherbert. That's a terrible name. Fitzherbert, the first Baron of St. Helens.
Yeah, I've heard that name before.
Puget Sound is named after Discovery's second lieutenant. Discovery is the boat. Peter Puget, who explored the southern region. That is genuinely a strange name for British people.
I was going to say this is a British man and not.
I wonder if he's Dutch or something like that.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like a English word.
British.
Mm-mm.
It could be like Germanic.
It's the way that the G is pronounced that doesn't make it sound like it's a English word.
Right. Yeah, because Puget that doesn't roll off. That's not very British. Mount Rainier is named after his close friend, Rear Admiral Peter Rainier. So the beer is named after an admiral. I'm drinking the admirals of beers.
It's Americanized form of Slovenian.
Oh, it's Slavic.
Pugel.
Oh.
Pugeli.
You learn something new every day.
It's hard because it's Slovenian.
With the accents.
Yeah, Pugelj.
Oh, yeah. So that explains why it's such a weird word for us to say if it's from a different language. Well, I learned something today. I didn't know that at all. Port Gardner and Port Susan are named after his former commander, Vice Admiral Sir Alan Gardner, and his wife, Susanna, Lady Gardner. You know where Port Susan is?
Not really.
It's right next to Warm Beach. It's off of Camano Island.
Oh, okay.
It's between
I feel like I had
Stanwood
heard it.
and
So
Camano
yeah,
Island.
that makes sense why I have heard it.
Do
you want to know where Puget is most likely found in?
Where?
France.
French.
702 people in the family tree there. 51 in Spain. And 27 in America.
Interesting.
Not very many Pugets out there.
Where are my Pugets at? Whidbey Island's named after, of course, Joseph Whidbey, the chief naval engineer of the expedition.
The name I've heard many a times.
Yes. And it's spelled several different ways as well. I've seen it spelled with the B, Whidbey,
Well,
with
it
double
happens
E's.
when you have uniform language.
Yeah.
And also many different languages being
spoken
in this area.
Yeah. There are a lot of Dutch people, so it makes sense.
I mean, yeah, you're going to get both multiple forms because at this point, the Americans did not have a standard way of spelling. That was, I don't remember when that was developed. I want to say like
what the
later in the 1800s.
With like the standardized dictionary. I think the first one comes out in like the like 1830s, I want to say, and then they have to keep adding because there's more and more immigrants from weirder and weirder places for them. They're like, I don't even know where Romania is. How do you say that?
And I think the first dictionary was 1828.
Let's go.
If it is for, I'm not totally sure, but
that was off the top of my head. I knew.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too. That it was like early to mid 1800s is when they had spelling. I mean, like they had some. It also doesn't help that like a large majority of the population at this point is illiterate. So
that also doesn't help. Basically the United States has like a 60% literacy rate. So, Discovery Passage, Discovery Island, Discovery Bay, Port Discovery, and Discovery Park are all named after the ship.
Oh, cool.
The HMS Discovery.
Creative.
Hey man, I don't want. Bellingham Bay, later Bellingham City, is named after Sir William Bellingham, the first baronet of controller of storekeepers' accounts for the Royal Navy. Basically, he made a bay named after his logistics officer. He said...
This is weird. He's just going down this line of favorite people.
He just had a list. He was like, yeah, I owe that guy a favor. Yeah, that guy bought me a drink once. Yeah, that's my buddy.
Imagine you're part of his crew and you never get named anything.
That would be brutal.
He just never names.
He doesn't even think about you. He's just like, whatever. I don't...
No, he said, I don't like you, actually. You're not even worthy of a seal.
I don't name anything after you.
Look at these giant flobs of blubber on the shore. You don't even deserve to be named after them. They don't deserve to be named after you.
I'm not going to name anything after you, loser. But as a whole, and surprisingly for British culture, he has a very non-violent record. He is a very well-disciplined ship.
We're still talking about Vancouver?
Yes, we're talking about Vancouver. He is friends. Well, I wouldn't say friends. He knows James Cook, who famously gets killed by the Hawaiians in a couple of years from here.
So Joseph would be in Vancouver or Friends?
Yes.
Oh, cool.
Well, Whidbey serves underneath him, but I assume that they're probably
If he
friends.
named an island after him,
he probably
they're
is
friends.
like, we're friends. You're cool. You get an island. James Cook, if anyone wants to know a bad naval officer for the British, James Cook is the guy. He's just a complete sociopath, kills everything that gets in his way. And then, like I said, he gets killed in Hawaii, like in 1798, because...
Is he of the Cook Islands?
Yes, same guy. Horror show. Believe it or not, Vancouver often writes how bad James Cook is, which is hilarious to see. Like in real time, people be like, "Wow, that guy is really awful. Glad thing we don't work with him." Mm-hmm. In 1804, the Lewis and Clark expedition leaves St. Louis. They go to survey the coast on behalf of the United States. Mm-hmm. And find a river passage overland to act as a Northwest Passage. So they're hoping to connect the Mississippi River to the Missouri River, mm-hmm. from the Missouri River to the area up here.
And they do it.
They basically do it, except they have to go and do portage a couple times. And they do have to do a couple overland routes, mm-hmm. through the mountains, which is really tough.
Yeah.
This is one of those, like, why didn't they just build a canal?
Sorry.
But they, clear reasons why the United States can't just build a canal from Atlantic to Pacific. It would be very logistically difficult to maintain. But they make it front and back. And the state, from our own U.S. State Department page, it says that the U.S. claims were based on the explorations of Lewis and Clark and on the establishment of trading post by John Jacob Astor's Pacific Fur Company, which came quickly after, such as Astoria at the mouth of the Columbia River. Great Britain's claims were based on those of James Cook's and, of course, George Vancouver's.
I do sort of think it's funny that we were like, Lewis and Clark, okay, you get counties named after you.
Just straight up.
Lewis County, Clark County.
Clark County is interesting. He got Clark County, and Lewis County is like one of the more larger counties in the state. And then like Clark County is like a tiny county. So small.
It's also interesting because most of the counties in our state are named after indigenous tribes.
Yeah, we have Clallam County, Skagit County, Snohomish County, Whatcom County.
Okanagan,
yeah.
Spokane,
yep.
Yakima. I don't think that's a county.
Yakima's a tribe, and Yakima County is a
county. Yeah, okay. Yeah.
So, remember I was telling you about all those Spanish possessions that basically have no holder now? Well, the reason why they don't have a holder is because Spain can't physically maintain those spaces, even though there are Spanish people living there. It's just like no government, basically, because they can't send an army down the river. They can't send an army up the ocean to go help settlers being attacked by other colonial powers or tribes.
See, this is the thing that always got me about, I'm putting it in the context of like claim jumping, because that was a thing that has been talked about often when you go through history class in California, state history in California, and a little bit in Washington. Not really much. But claim jumping, and it's just like, I understand it was a large issue, but also I would be that person and be like, who's gonna stop me?
Yeah.
There's nobody here to enforce it. And it's the same thing here.
100%.
Where, like, why would I respect that the Spanish own this? There's nobody here.
Right. It says on the map it's Spanish land, but there's no one here to stop me from doing whatever I want.
Unlike the British colonies where people will stop you. And at this point it's American.
Yeah,
right?
and that's the thing that's interesting to me, is that you see civilization, and I put in quotation marks, and supposedly European civilization, because I have to keep reminding myself and everyone who's listening, people live here. Millions of people already live between California and Alaska, and we as Western countries just did not even acknowledge them as people. We were like, they're fauna.
Right.
But you're absolutely correct where different governments have different styles of managing empire. The British model is far more, I would consider it far more disciplined, where it's like, there's the law, and you are a British citizen. And even if you do messed up stuff, if you go against the crown, there's going to be someone who brings you to account. As opposed to like the United States, where it's like, do whatever you like until we can figure out how to get a sheriff out there, or a deputy, or a marshal out there.
That's true. I was gonna say Britain loves its laws.
It loves laws.
It loves law.
It's a people of laws. Law and order.
Yeah, I will say, yeah, in America, as we know from playing the history textbook of Red Dead Redemption 2.
It's the age of the end of the outlaw. The last of the law outlaws.
Yeah, they really did sort of just, if you were colonizing your own area, they just sort of let you go. They were like, have fun.
A lot of states' history, even our own, is just based off of like small groups of people basically running entire, like, what would be considered in Europe small, like, duchies.
Their women are doing cross stitch. I kept saying crossword in my mind. Cross stitches that say become ungovernable.
Become ungovernable.
They're taking literally the Oregon Trail.
well, it does, and I think that these things are showing it takes a certain person to want to go to the frontier, right? Mm-hmm. It takes a certain amount of, I would say, I hate to say it like this because it's like, oh, it's talking bad about the people's past, but like, it takes a certain amount of lust, like lust for insert item. It could be freedom from people. It can be lust for land, lust for prosperity. But it's like you're making a decision in your head where like, the government won't be there if something bad happens to me. I will have no one to back me up. Mm-hmm. It's just me. And I don't know how much of that is mythology, but like just by distance, like some people's properties were miles away. Like you weren't able to like go to your neighbor and say, hey, how you doing? It took like some of these guys, it took half a day to make it to like two of their neighbors. Like it was a lot.
You get mauled by a wildcat, you're dead.
You're done out there. It's over for you. And there's no hospitals. There's no, like, everything's just a mud thatch hut, basically. Mm-hmm. You know, say what you want about, like, the East Coast, but, like, at least they had hospitals at this point. At least they had, like, doctors.
Yeah.
I mean, they weren't very good. Doctors really didn't really get good until, basically, like, the 1950s. But, yeah, it's just interesting to see the different styles of colonization, because the Spanish were just like, we'll just let the Catholic Church run everything. That's how missions, I mean, you're from California.
Oh, yeah, we had to do a mission thing.
There's so many missions, and that's how they ran everything.
I can't remember what mission I had, but we had to do they do state history in fourth or third grade. Mm. They probably do it later too, but anyway, one of our our projects was we had to recreate a mission, and like we were each assigned a mission. We had to research it, and then I made it out of sugar cubes and like little chocolate rocks. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's how Spain managed its colonies, was through the church, basically. Didn't work out too great for them.
I mean, they did colonize a lot of space, and like, I feel like America, the United States likes to forget that, like, there's an entire continent, and also like pretty much half of our continent that they did colonize.
Yeah,
because we like to think
that the structure for it, right?
Yeah, we like to think that like Britain colonized the entire at least North America, but that is
they
not
came
correct.
Yeah, you're right, because the British even came in late game because most of Northern America was also French too. So it's like France really did late game revisions. They were like, oh, we also have Canada, which it's like, okay, cool. Not really.
Well, but they more firmly had Canada than they ever had the United States. Louisiana being the exception, but like the United States does not
St.
have...
Louis, the whole upper like Minnesota, all Chicago, those are all French cities.
Yeah, but they don't have quite the French influence still.
Yeah, I think it's because
they don't speak French.
I know. I was gonna say I think it's because we beat that out of them.
Well, yeah, but
and I'm saying we beat that out of them as Americans. We didn't they were like that. They were very unique before that.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like, they don't have as... Like, you think that Canada didn't try and kill out the French speakers and...
Oh, no, they did, for sure. Right,
like, that's what I'm saying. In the French culture in Louisiana was strong enough to survive, just like it was in Quebec.
Yeah.
To survive. And isn't there another one? Maybe it's just Quebec that I'm
thinking. It's Arcadia, Montreal, and...
Montreal, that's the other one. But, like, specifically Quebecois is, like... the language is different.
That word. The Quebecois. Yeah, it's just an interesting thing to see, like you said, kind of like a revision of that, though, because, like, Britain didn't run this continent, or it's the bottom continent, South America, either. It actually had a few holdings in the 13 colonies, basically.
It's just U.S. centrism. Yeah. I mean, it's not anything profound.
Right.
But
it's not deep.
I'm just saying that sometimes the initial impulse is to discredit Spain for how much they colonized, because they did fully create, like, almost 2 continents that speak their language.
Yeah, plus the Philippines. Everyone forgets that, too.
Mm-hmm.
They had the Philippines pretty down pat for a long time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in 1819, under the terms of the Onís-Adams Treaty, Spain ceded its territorial claims to the United States instead of giving them over to Britain. As the ultimate, like, middle finger, they're like...
That's what I would do.
We're not giving this to England.
I mean, especially because America at this point is, like, 50 years old.
Right. You know...
They're like...
They might not make it.
Yeah, they're like, but Britain will, and therefore...
Yeah, why would you give this to Britain? America might, like, drop those colonies
They said
eventually.
if America dies out, we can just return.
Right. In that treaty between the British and the Americans, they agreed to place the border...
You mean the Spanish and the Americans?
No, the British. Because they were doing, like, an arbitration of multiple parties.
Okay.
The British and the Americans agreed to put their border at the 49th parallel at the Lake of the Woods in Minnesota territory, which is west of the Rockies. So they wanted just kind of like a straight line.
Which is what we currently have, is the 49th parallel.
It is. Things got a little messy.
No. Well, yeah. I know a lot about this sort of, like, Canada. I mean, you're going to do more detail than I know on the specifics, but I do know, like, we did initially agree to not go north of the Columbia River.
Right. It says the United States, the treaty agreed that the United States wanted the border to extend at the same parallel all the way into the Pacific Ocean. So that means that we would have also gotten Victoria in south of the island. So, like, you know where our border is? It would just keep going.
Oh, I see.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah,
so, like, for the viewer...
Yeah, because Victoria does kind of come down past that line.
Right. For the listener, Victoria and Vancouver Island juts down past the 49th parallel. And the Americans wanted to just basically cut the island in half and take Victoria as one of their as their possessions.
What I was going to say was, isn't that how we ended up with Point Roberts? Was that line?
That's what I was going to say.
So how did Point Roberts get around it if Victoria didn't? I mean, obviously Victoria is their capital.
Because
so it's, like, more important.
And this comes later. It comes later. This comes later in the story. This is an important, great question. Save that. the Brits wanted, when I say the Brits, it's both the British and then what we consider now Canadians, because there are people who are Canadians, or they just consider themselves British.
I mean, they're going to consider themselves British for another 200 years.
They're never going to not consider
or whatever.
These
another 100 years. When did Canada, like, leave the...
They became a dominion, I believe, in 1860 something.
Oh, so like not that long.
But they were still technically part of the British Empire.
Oh, I know, like Australia. Yeah. They're losers.
Yeah, they weren't a country. They weren't a country, I don't think, until like 1890 or something.
I think that anyone in the British Commonwealth is a loser. Listen.
Hot take.
Hot take. Canada and Australia especially. Because
you're like, get your own country.
You guys didn't even revolt. Like Australia, you think that the British are gonna send down people to like you? They're so far away. You could just declare independence.
Also, they were all inmates. A lot of them.
Currently,
like they could have just totally had left, and like, what was Britain going to do? Oh no! All these criminals just decided to leave the empire.
Or like 100 years, even if you didn't like revolt, like 100 years after they were like, "Oh, you're your own dominion. Why don't you just cut ties and not be part of the Commonwealth?
You can leave at any time.
Why do you want to be attached to Britain?" Because of Charles? Like, you really into the king? Like,
that's a really good point about Australia. I never really think about it with Australia. I think more of it about Canada because it's so close to the United States. It's like, how did you guys not feel the, like, urge to just leave? But Australia, no one's watching.
You guys are so far.
No one is watching.
Canada is closer to Britain, especially, like, if you're talking about,
side,
like...
yeah.
Yeah, well, if you're talking about the uninhabited lands of Canada... too. It's like very close to Britain compared to...
Oh my gosh. That's a great point.
Australia is literally halfway across the world.
They couldn't do anything even if they wanted to. if the Australians wanted to leave, what are the British gonna do about it? Oh, we're gonna send a fleet from China? Like, it's still gonna take a month to get there.
Do Australians like British people? Like, I don't understand. Do you like the royals? Like, I'm just thinking, like, catch Ireland dead.
That's a good point, too. I do love that. I know that technically I'm not going to offend my Irish brothers and sisters by saying they're Angloids, because they're not. But I do think it's interesting that the only member of Great Britain's society that revolted against Great Britain is the United States and Ireland.
No, I know. I'm just thinking, like, okay,
and Ireland's right next to the Great Britain, like right next.
That's what I'm saying. Like, if tomorrow Britain was like, okay, Northern Ireland, you're a dominion, they would immediately say, I don't like you. Like.
That's true. That's true, because, like, right now, too, especially, they're going to be like, yeah, we
and then they would rejoin the country, as they should.
They're going to go, we're going to take our chances.
No, here's even better. If Scotland or Wales, they were just suddenly like, you're not really part of you're just part of the Commonwealth now. Again, immediately, would be like, we're good.
Scotland for sure.
I think Wales would also.
I don't even know anything about Wales. Like, really? Like, I know a little bit of, like, cursory information, but...
Yeah, I mean, I think Wales has been a part of Britain for longer.
Yeah. It was a weaker country before...
It's been colonized for a very long time.
So what we're saying is, technically, this isn't even the original colonization or, like, border crisis. Technically, the Irish British border has always been the original.
I mean, no, the English-Welsh border.
We're going all the way back.
And then the English-Scottish border. And then...
the Irish border.
But the Irish border is still ongoing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. It's a good point. It's never... I mean, they've signed a ceasefire, but it's never been settled. Because they're still Northern
Until
Ireland.
Derry is part of Ireland again.
Londonderry.
Yeah.
What an
it's
insane thing where it's like, there's a small group, I wouldn't say small group, a medium-sized group of the population who's like, we love the people who did genocide on our continent, or our island, so much. Mm-hmm. We love the Queen, actually. Like, I would, the moment I had a chance to drop that group... We're having House of Windsor talk. We were so far off, but
I'm just saying
it's just like a thing that it's a good point, Mikayla. You're absolutely correct. And it says that the British wanted the northern border to be drawn actually all the way to the Columbia River.
Yeah.
They just said, how about you get none of Washington? You just don't get anything. Which, would that have been bad for us?
Okay, they already had a Vancouver.
Right, they already owned it. They already had it. It was theirs.
Which is one of my favorite things, is that the reason we have Vancouver, Washington, is because it was the first Vancouver.
Yeah.
And then the Canadians had to make a new Vancouver.
Because we moved the border up.
Bye-bye.
That's ours, actually. Thank you. Have a nice day.
Well, people were cohabitating. I don't know if you're going to mention this, people were cohabitating in this territory.
Oh, yeah. That's what I was, literally, my next point was, there was a joint administration between the United States and Great Britain since Spanish had no claims, which meant that the colonists literally, from both nations, were living together, even though they were different citizens from different places. They didn't really, there was no, you would be like, I did a crime in this area, and both governments decided how the justice would have to be administrated.
Which is so weird.
That is, well, and that's why I was like, this is a great topic about borders and all these ideas, because Americans, if you told an average middle-aged white American that at one point their ancestor had to live under both British and American law, or had to be afraid of two different set of sovereign laws, they'd be like, what do you mean this is America? We're a sovereign country. It's like, no. America's sovereignty is literally slowly accumulated over time. It didn't just happen like that. Not everyone just said, oh, it's America, we just do whatever you want. But you're right. They were living together, and they had to live together, and sometimes it didn't end well.
This fast and loose relationship with Canada that happens in this area is still ongoing. Well, it used to be more so, because up until, what was it, 2010?
Until that border security law.
Yeah, 2010, we
used to be really...
You could just go to Canada with your driver's license. You didn't need anything.
There was a time living here, and I remember it, where you could not tell a difference really between an American and a Canadian.
You still really can't. You really, for the most part, you really cannot.
Yeah.
Between specifically Washington and Canada.
Yeah.
And BC specifically, I will say.
Yeah.
They might have a little bit more of an accent, but it's not the typical Canadian accent that you think of when you think of Canadian accents, because that's over in the Great Lakes.
Funny to me, anytime you bump into Edmonton, Saskatchewan Canadians, Albertans and stuff like that, they're just like people from Montana. They literally just sound like them. They talk like them. They wear the same clothes.
You can't clock a Canadian until you see their car, or you hear them say a toque or something instead of a beanie. You know what I mean? And the same is true for when we go to Canada, because when we were in Canada, they didn't clock us as Americans until we have to pay for something.
Yeah.
For the most part,
right. Yeah, she didn't. The waiter didn't even know until we paid.
Which is, because we have the same accent. Right. We share the same, I don't know, 200, 300 miles of land.
Yeah.
We have very, it's the same weather system.
Yeah, living in Bellingham, we probably have more weather like British Columbia than
so we dress the same.
Most of the rest of the state does.
Yeah.
We literally get whatever British Columbia gets.
Especially Bellingham to British Columbia, the difference is nothing.
Minimal.
Yeah.
We might as well just be Canadian citizens.
Yeah.
Roll the border back. Canada, we long for freedom. Please help us.
When your cell phone you can be in Blaine and your cell phone pings as Canada, you might as well be in Canada.
Yeah, it's a mess.
I'm so glad that they don't charge for Canadian roaming anymore.
Oh, that was a tough time. On the north of Whidbey, you would sometimes be able to pick up Canadian signal, and it's wow.
When I was in college, I was volunteering at I think it was Animals for Natural Therapy, which they have a barn out in Blaine. It was either that or the Whatcom Humane Society that has a barn out in Blaine, and my phone picked up Canadian charges, so I had to turn it off so I wouldn't get charged like $2, $3 a day or whatever. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So they decided to postpone that decision for the border where it was going to be on the parallel for 10 years. And then in 1827, they decided to postpone it yet again another year.
Bad choices.
Because they were like, hey,
should have figured that one out,
we're not going to figure this out. Well, because the Americans were not budging.
Well, yeah, because that's what we do.
As some of us will know the term manifest destiny, we were definitely in our manifest destiny era.
I'll also say the Americans are so embedded. Americans don't leave unless you force them out.
They're the worst house guests. Benjamin Franklin was right. Like, Americans, if they're your house guests, start to stink real quick.
And I don't think I think it's too soon after the revolution that these people are not going to willingly be like, okay, I'll
Especially
just be a British
citizen. Especially if a British person tells them to do something.
Well, I'm saying that they're not going to, like, so example, if Britain did get to the Columbia River border like they wanted, you wouldn't necessarily have to leave if you lived in that
That's a good
territory.
Point. Mm-hmm.
You can choose to become a British citizen again. Mm-hmm. But I think we're too close to the revolution that nobody would have chosen that.
Right. This is 1820s.
Yeah,
this is like the first American generation born after the revolution. So a lot of these people who are coming into adulthood, who are adults, are like, I'm an American. Like, what does that mean to them? I'm an American.
And if you have a house, I mean, you're not going to choose to leave your house and your property.
Unless you, like a lot of these folks, it seems that they just rolled up and took it.
I mean, I would be actually really curious how many Canadian citizens, or I guess British colonizers, just didn't leave and became American citizens.
I bet you a fair bit.
So that's probably what I would do in their position. I wouldn't leave unless I was like really a loyalist.
Yeah. The only people who really move back and forth in this story I've been reading are soldiers, right? Because they're being ordered to move back and forth.
Yeah, right? It's like the officials.
Most people just kind of stay, which shows you a thing that I do believe. I think Americans like to hype up themselves about the idea of being Americans, but I think they're like everywhere else. Like, a lot of the time you hear in like these foreign wars, people are like, why aren't the insert native, locals fighting hard for this? Is like, because to them, it's not going to change one way or the other. These people are still their neighbors. They still know these people after it's over. And I think that that's the same thing with this, where it's like, I know that guy.
Yeah.
He's my neighbor.
If tomorrow Canada was like, actually, we're going to take the, we're going to take it to the Columbia line.
I'm not moving.
Even if they were like, we're going to take it until the end of Skagit County, I would not move.
I would not move.
I would just become a Canadian citizen.
I would just switch sides. Because why? Why would I move?
We're a dual citizen, I guess, at this point.
But like, why would I move, right? Yeah. Like, also, that's the thing, is like, why would I move? Like, that's what you start seeing a lot in this story, is like people trying to force people into that position of like, you're either with us or against us.
Yeah.
In 1842, they passed the Webster-Ashburton Treaty. The British have great last names with their ministers. The Webster-Ashburton Treaty in 1842 tries to normalize that border, basically firms it up.
The Columbia one or the 42 parallel?
The 49, and just keep things. 49. Yeah, keep things. But it also reaffirms that treaty up to the line of the land, but does not administer the water.
Unless you're Point Roberts.
And then makes an agreement between Great Britain that both parties should officially end transatlantic slavery at some point in the future.
Yeah, that's a good thing to do.
1842, which England had outlawed slavery at that point, and transatlantic slavery, by like 10 years at that point. So it's like kind of late America, but okay. 1843, that decision leads to a nationalist chant of 54 or 54 40 or fight from the Polk campaign, who wins the election later, because nationalists are like, no, we don't want the 49. We want to go all the way to the top of just because, just like I said, the treaty had already been kind of like, we know the general areas. It's either going to be between the Columbia River or the 49th parallel.
Mm-hmm.
We finally got the Brits to agree to the 49th parallel.
And then they won't.
And then the Americans said, we're going, the hardcore Americans, the guy who shows up with the wolf t-shirt or the American Bald Eagle t-shirt comes in screaming, we want all the way up to 54.
That's all the habitable land in Canada.
That's literally just Canada.
They said you can have the wilderness that nobody can live in if you want.
You can have the hat.
You can have the polar bears.
So
if you want.
So that was a very dark time in American history. We had just conquered parts of Mexico, or we were about to conquer parts of Mexico.
In California?
In California.
In Texas?
Texas.
Mm-hmm.
And we went to war with Mexico. We get Gadsden Purchase after we forced Mexico to sell half of their territory to us through a phony war that I can't cover because it's not relevant to this topic. But some have said the first staged American war,
Matt's
war based
launching
on
a side
lies.
podcast where he just goes on his rants.
The Mexican War literally was a fake Iraq style war. I have seen the primary sources in class. I was like, so you just did a false flag attack.
Mm-hmm.
That's cool. That's normal. Very normal government we got here all the way from the beginning. But it's inflammatory, basically. This is causing issues both internally in the United States and externally with our relationship with Great Britain. In 1846, they signed the Oregon Treaty, the official full document that basically is the main stamp of today, which makes the channel navigation open south of the 49th parallel to both parties. It's an open border, or, no one's like got guns and ships.
For a good almost 200 years, almost.
Yep. One of the most safest borders in the history of the
150.
human species, basically, which is impressive. Especially since we used to be enemies. The treaty also has in it the right of property compensation to the Puget Sound Agricultural Company, which is a subsidy of the Hudson Bay Company, and it also has on it that the islands, they will find a seaborne border between the islands of the San Juans, and they're trying to figure out which one they're going to use, and that's where the big trouble actually starts to boil over. Once that line starts getting more firm and firmer, who gets the islands? Did you know, quick fact, that Abraham Lincoln was offered the governorship of Oregon Territory before?
Yeah, I don't think he would have been president.
He would have not been president.
Out of Illinois? No.
Yeah. He would have not been president.
Yeah, you'd have
for sure.
You have to stay where the people are.
I personally think sometimes, because this was at the time of the end of the Whigs, I think they were trying to put him out there so that he couldn't cause them any problems.
The Whig Party.
Yeah, the Whig parties.
Imagine.
The treaty was signed, and eventually in 1848, Oregon Territory was officially established under the pressure of locals to the federal government because tribal members killed a missionary, Marcus Whitman, in 1847. The Senate approved this new free state, which basically did not allow black people to actually even live there. So that was slave or not. And the Southern Democrats lost it. They went insane that Oregon got admitted into a territory status with free state status already. Mm-hmm. Almost demanding that Arizona and New Mexico become slave states because of it. So they're already causing the American political environment to destabilize, on top of already all the issues inside the American system. And this is the frontier. This is all the way out here. There's no real touchstones with the East Coast. So that last part, or those last two parts, are super important of the treaty's conditions. I said about the Hudson Bay Company. The Hudson Bay Company is an extremely important company, and it will factor heavy in the next episode. The Hudson Bay Company and their land in the San Juan Islands, which is now in the 1850s a part of Island County. Back when Island County was the whole
county.
The whole state.
Snohomish County, right?
Whatcom, Skagit Island, San
so
Juan,
big.
Vashon Island, Jefferson County.
Just a little wisp of smoke of what it used to be.
A small little fry.
Imagine losing all that power.
But Mikayla, I said that, just kind of leaving us like on the edge here. Like we have a crisis in the San Juans where the Brits want San Juan Island and give the Americans the rest of the San Juans, and the Americans are like, we want all of the San Juans, even though no Americans live on San Juan Island.
I was gonna say, I don't think those are really inhabited by Americans yet.
Yeah, only Brits, which is kind of interesting because you would never know that now, but
I mean, like, not very many people live in the San Juans.
That's true. I mean, right now.
Yeah. Yeah, like, isn't one of them like 50 people's their total population?
Yeah.
So
yeah. So, Mikayla, are you excited for what happens next?
I'm actually really excited for this war that's coming up because I think it's so ridiculous and I want to hear more.
The Pig War is coming to a theater near you. Well, that's this episode, and we will come back with the second episode in the next go around, and then that'll be my last episode of the season.
Yay!
And then we'll have Mikayla's topic after that.
Yeah, and I don't know how long mine's going to be yet, but we'll see.
We'll see.
Tulips could go a lot.
It's tulip season. I got so many crazy stories about tulips. I can't wait to hear yours.
The thing is, I could go so deep with it.
There's so many.
Because I could talk about, like, the Dutch immigration and then talk about, which I might have to touch on, but I don't know. I feel like I could go pretty in depth with them. So I'm going to try and stick mostly about the festival history.
Right.
And, like, the origins of the festival, I think is where I'm going to stick.
I think that's a good place I think that's a really good place to do it.
Yeah.
Alrighty.
All right. Leave us a rating.
Yo.
Leave us a rating. Share with friends.
Share with your friends. Like our podcast. Send it out there. The more people who get to listen to this, the more we get to teach people about the ridiculous border conflict known as the Pig War.
I've been teasing the Pig War since the beginning on some... Also, shout out to our one Italian listener.
We have a listener in Italy?
If that's you, shout out.
Shout out. I hope you hear this. Grazie. We appreciate you. And if you ever want to send in something or send in a request, I definitely would more than willingly dig deep. Unless it's for Mikayla, then of course she'll do her thing.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So part 2 coming your way soon.
See you next time.
All right, that's it.
Bye.
Goodbye.